In the notes to this game is one of the most amazing combinations I have ever seen in my life. This is Wesley So versus Vidit Gujrathi at the Tata Steel India Rapid, 25 minutes for each side with a 10-second increment. And what's more, not only does this contain an amazing combination, but it's a gambit. It's Evans' gambit, played at the highest level. We don't see that very often. Let's jump right in. Vidit has white, Wesley So has black, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. So far, just a standard Italian game. But then Vidit probably really surprised Wesley with this move, b4, the Evans gambit. Obviously, you're trying to distract the bishop from the center and then win a tempo and expand yourself as white. Black can chicken out and play bishop to b6, but Wesley So takes the gauntlet, takes the pawn at b4. Now c3. Bishop e7 is a possibility, but Wesley So plays the main move, bishop to a5. And the reason Black likes to play this move is after d4, as was played in the game, there is a pin on this c3 pawn, so the bishop is well placed at a5 in that sense. Black plays d6 to help strengthen the pawn at e5, and also Wesley So allows his bishop at c8 to free up. And the threats already begin in the Evans gambit. Queen to b3. Vidit is aiming at this f7 pawn, threatening bishop takes f7 check. So Wesley So plays queen to d7 to defend the f7 pawn laterally. And here, white castles. de5 is actually not is a popular move, but it doesn't work out that well. Let's take a look. After bishop to b6, ed6, it looks like white is doing well, but then knight to a5. This is a very important theme for black in this opening. The knight going to a5, hitting the queen and the bishop. Queen b5, take on c4, and then queen d6. And then with the two bishops and a better pawn structure, you see these weaknesses at a2 and c3. Black is actually a little bit better probably in that position. So Vidit goes ahead and castles instead. Bishop to b6. Now usually when black can get that bishop to b6, he can begin to feel a little bit better about his position. It begins to feel a little safer, and the a5 square is available to the knight. Knight b to d2. The knight does go to a5. The knight at d2 now can recapture on c4. The queen goes to c2. Knight takes c4. Knight takes c4. And for the moment, black has the two bishops. Now, the most commonly played move for black in this position is actually to just take on d4. But after cd4, white really has everything they want in this position. You got a nice full pawn center with space, good lead in development, and white scores very well from this position. So Wesley instead plays the move queen to c6, immediately applying pressure to the knight at c4. So the knight goes ahead and grabs on b6. That does eliminate the two bishop edge. A b6, that opens up the a file for black's rook. Then white takes in the center and then grabs the pawn at e5, hitting the queen with tempo. Now, white has a pretty good score in this position, but the computers say it's equal. And what Wesley So does here is he immediately plays queen to a4. He wants to get queens off to take advantage of these weaknesses in an endgame. Vidit wants to keep the attack going, so he avoids the exchange of queens with queen to d3. Knight to e7, and now queen to g3, shifting the queen to the king side to attack, immediately aiming at the g7 pawn. Wesley So goes ahead and castles. It may look like white can just play bishop h6 here because of the pin on this pawn from the queen, but in this position, black would just play knight to g6, and white would have nothing. So instead, Vidit plays rook to e1 to defend the e4 pawn, which is currently under attack from the queen. And now bishop to e6. This is the novelty of the game. But white has space, comfortable development, and he's recovered the pawn and has nothing to complain about. I think most Evans Gambit players would be happy to play this position as white. h4, continuing the attack. He wants to play h5, h6, wreck the kingside pawn structure, get in on the dark squares. King to h8. h5, a good move here, bishop f4, aiming at the c7 pawn after rook a to c8. Then I can retreat to f3, attacking this pawn. And if c5, say rook a to b1, going after b6, and white would have a nice initiative in this position. He goes ahead and plays h5 first, and black has to stop h6, so he plays h6 himself. The only difference is After bishop to f4, as was played in the game, now rook to a5. He doesn't have to defend this pawn because when the knight moves, he actually can grab on h5, so the rook can be posted a little more aggressively. So Vidit plays rook a to d1. He's fine with giving up the a2 pawn, but he wants to get his pieces centralized and developed. Queen takes a2, and now knight to f3. A strong move here would have been knight to d7. It hits the rook. If the rook moves, then this amazing move was possible, knight to f6. It looks like it's hanging the knight, but at the moment, black has to do something about the rook at d1. Let's say rook d1. And if he takes the knight, then bishop h6 threatening mate on g7, and you just have to block. You have to give up material, and threatening mate on h8. White would just be winning in that position. So instead, if bishop takes d7, just rook takes d7. He's got a rook on the 7th, and he's doing pretty well. But instead, Vidit retreats the knight back to f3, and now the rook does take on h5. The position is unbalanced, but equal. Bishop takes c7, knight to g6, and we see black's kingside pieces begin to assemble around white's king. Bishop takes b6, king to h7, and bishop to d4. The bishop is on a nice square, centralized in the middle of the board. The rook goes to e8. Potentially, he can threaten e4 later with that move. Rook to a1 to kick the queen away. Queen c4, rook to a7. Attacking b7, the queen goes back to c6. Now the queen is also pressing on the e4 pawn. Vidit removes the rook, moves it back to a1, and now bishop to d7. In this position, black is threatening to take on e4 with the queen and the rook both pressing. Knight to d2 adds another defender, and then rook to g5. And we can begin to see how Wesley So's pieces are becoming very aggressively placed. He hits the queen, puts some pressure on g2. The queen goes to h2, and then a brilliant move from Wesley So. He plays the move f5. What he wants to do is basically get this e-pawn out of the way so the queen and rook can coordinate with their attack on the g2 square. In this position, if pawn takes pawn, then after knight f4, black is just completely crushing and collapsing the g2 pawn. So instead, Vidit plays rook to a5, pins the pawn laterally. If pawn takes pawn, rook g5, and he would win. So b5 is played by Wesley So to block that pressure from white's rook. The rook goes to a7. Now fe4. Black is now up a pawn with an attack. So what Vidit does is play the move queen to c7, which looks like it forces the exchange of queens. He can either exchange the queen or lose the bishop at d7. And this is the point where Wesley could have played an amazing move. If he had played this, they would have showered the board with gold pieces. I mean, this would have been unbelievable. The move is this: brilliancy, e3. Now, first of all, it threatens queen takes g2 mate. So white has to do something about that, but then he could just take the queen. And black cannot retake, because if he plays bishop c6, rook takes g7 check, and white gets a standard windmill attack with the rook and bishop. So what instead black would do is take on d2. Obviously, that threatens the rook, and he's one square away from queening. If rook e8, then d1 queen, king h2, rook h5, king g3, queen g4 would be mate. So he cannot take the rook at e8. White would have to play rook to d1. But then rook to e1 check. And he can't take on e1 because then you promote to a queen. After king h2, knight to e5 would lead to a forced mate in that position. Either knight g4, bishop takes, queen takes with check. So after rook to e1, white would have to play king to h2, at which point rook takes d1. And even here, queen to d7, threatening mate on g7, would be a blunder because of this combination. Rook h1 check, forcing king takes rook, rook to h5 check, and if king to g1, you promote to queen, and that would be checkmate. So the best move for white would be queen to f3, but then rook to e1 with the threat of mate. Rook takes bishop, and you can't promote yet because rook g7 check. So instead, knight to h4, defends g7, attacks the queen. Queen to d3 check, attacking the king and the pawn. King to g8, and at the rook d8, king f7. And even here, if queen takes d2, then rook g2 check, king h3, rook h1 would be mate. So the best move would be g3, but then you promote to a queen, and black would have a decisive material advantage. That is what would have happened if he had played e3 in this position. That would have been an historic combination. But he instead plays the move knight to f8, which helps defend the bishop and the g7 square. Queen c6, bishop c6, bishop e3 attacking the rook, rook d5, rook c7, bishop to d7, rook to a1, knight e6 attacks the rook, attacking the bishop, bishop to c6, exchanging a pair of rooks, bishop to d5, and very soon after knight e4, king g6, knight d6, pawns are exchanged. And in this position of the exchange of rooks, we have opposite colored bishops. Each side has 2 pawns on the same side of the board, and the players agreed a draw. It's a bit of a shame he didn't see that move, but I mean, obviously, human beings really aren't able to see that. But I wanted to share that amazing combination with you. I hope you enjoyed this game. See you again soon. Bye.